What if the person you trusted most was the very reason you were being hunted? Corinna Ashwell thought she was chasing the truth about her father's dark empire until betrayal struck from the one place she never expected. A folder full of secrets, a protector with hidden loyalties, and enemies lurking in every shadow. Her fight for justice becomes a battle for survival. But when the final mask slips, one chilling question remains. If Adrian wasn't the true architect of her father's empire, then who is? Corinna Ashwell had always been a woman people underestimated. To the outside world, she was little more than a quiet, dutiful daughter, the kind of woman who blended into the background at family gatherings and corporate functions. She dressed elegantly but never extravagantly, spoke politely but rarely with weight, and seemed to move through life as if her only role was to obey and endure. At 32, she was still seen by her wealthy family as dependent, fragile, and incapable of carving her own destiny. But beneath the polished exterior and the faint, reserved smile lay something no one suspected, an empire carefully built in silence. Corinna had spent 15 years crafting a double life. By day, she tolerated the biting remarks of her mother, the cold dismissal of her father, and the patronizing smiles of relatives who saw her as little more than ornamental. By night, she became someone else entirely, an architect of power, weaving businesses, investments, and partnerships into something formidable. Piece by piece, deal by deal, she had constructed an empire worth over $47 million. No one knew. Not her mother, who still ordered her around as if she were a servant. Not her father, who rarely looked up from his ledgers to acknowledge her existence. Not her younger siblings, who mocked her for her lack of ambition. And certainly not the guests who would arrive at her parents' mansion on Christmas Eve that would change everything. The Ashwell mansion was glowing with festive lights that night, every corner decorated to impress. Silver garlands shimmered along the staircase, crystal ornaments dangled from the 12-foot tree in the foyer, and a staff of servants bustled in quiet efficiency to ensure nothing fell short of perfection. It was a performance, as all things were in her family, an illusion of warmth that masked the ice beneath. Corinna had just finished arranging the last place setting at the dining table when her mother's voice cut through the room. "Corinna?" Eleanor Ashwell's tone carried the sharp edge of authority, laced with impatience. "The wine glasses are misaligned. Do you expect our guests to drink like peasants?" Corinna's fingers stilled. She glanced at the glasses, perfectly positioned, yet knew better than to argue. Her mother was not pointing out a mistake. She was reminding her of her place. "Yes, mother," she murmured, adjusting them by a fraction. From across the room, her younger sister, Juliana, smirked. "Good thing you're here, Corinna. Someone has to play maid tonight." The remark drew laughter from her brother, Adrian, who was scrolling idly on his phone. "Careful, Juliana. Don't exhaust her. She might collapse from all that effort." Their words stung, but Corinna swallowed the ache. She had learned long ago not to show weakness in front of them. They thrived on her silence, her apparent compliance. What they didn't realize was that every insult, every dismissal, had only fueled the fire she kept hidden. When the first guests arrived, Corinna slipped into the background as usual, greeting politely but never engaging deeply. These gatherings always followed the same pattern: her father, Charles Ashwell, boasting about his business ventures, Eleanor charming acquaintances with practiced elegance, Juliana flaunting her latest designer acquisitions, Adrian bragging about plans he never followed through on, and Corinna, the forgotten one, serving wine, ensuring coats were collected, and keeping the machinery of the evening running unnoticed. But tonight felt different. Among the guests was a man Corinna recognized instantly, though she had never met him in person before. Damien Holt, a name whispered in boardrooms and financial circles with equal parts respect and fear. He was sharp, ambitious, and known for turning struggling enterprises into gold or ashes if they crossed him. Her heart skipped, not because of attraction, but because of recognition. Holt wasn't just another wealthy guest. Months earlier, he had signed a multi-million-dollar partnership with a holding company, a company that Corinna herself owned through intricate layers of shell corporations. To everyone else, Damien Holt was her father's guest. To Corinna, he was her silent ally, bound by business, but oblivious to her identity. She kept her composure as she poured him wine, her eyes meeting his briefly. He looked at her without recognition, offering a polite smile before turning his attention back to her father. "Charles, always a pleasure," Holt said firmly, shaking her father's hand. "I hear you're considering a new expansion." Her father chuckled, pride swelling in his voice. "Of course. The Ashwells never rest. You know how it is." Corinna bit back a smile. If only he knew whose empire Holt was actually fueling. Dinner unfolded with the usual theatrics. Eleanor bragged about Juliana's recent vacation in Milan. Adrian interrupted conversations with exaggerated stories of his supposed ventures. Charles spoke about legacy and strength, conveniently leaving Corinna out of the narrative. At one point, Juliana leaned across the table, her voice dripping with mockery. "Corinna, what about you? Any exciting accomplishments lately? Or are you still what is it you do again?" The table chuckled softly. Corinna set down her fork carefully, meeting her sister's eyes with calm intensity. For a moment, she considered revealing everything: the companies, the partnerships, the silent power she wielded. But she stopped herself. The time wasn't right. Instead, she offered a measured smile. "Some things are better left unsaid until they matter." Her words drew confused looks, but she let the silence linger. Later that evening, as the guests moved to the drawing room for brandy and conversation, Corinna slipped outside to the terrace for air. The cold winter wind brushed against her cheeks, sharp and cleansing. She gazed out over the sprawling grounds, the lights of the estate glittering against the dark sky. She wasn't angry. Anger was too small, too fleeting. What she felt was something deeper. A quiet certainty that their arrogance, their blindness, would one day collapse under the weight of truth. And she would be the one holding that truth. Behind her, the terrace door opened. Damien Holt stepped outside, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint music drifting from inside. "You're Charles Ashwell's daughter, aren't you?" he asked casually. Corinna turned, meeting his gaze. There was no recognition of her true identity, but his eyes lingered on her longer than politeness required. "Yes," she replied simply. Something flickered in his expression, curiosity, perhaps, or intrigue. He extended his glass toward her in a small gesture. "Then I suppose I should thank you. You've been working hard tonight, keeping everything perfect." Corinna smiled faintly, though her mind was racing. If he only knew the truth, if he only understood who she really was. But she said nothing. Not yet. Inside, the laughter and boasting continued. Outside, under the cold night sky, Corinna Ashwell stood at the threshold of revelation, her secrets carefully locked away for now. What no one in that glittering house understood was that the balance of power was already shifting. And when it finally toppled, none of them would be prepared. The night wore on, and the air inside the Ashwell mansion thickened with arrogance and self-congratulation. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a glamorous holiday gathering: fine wine, rare cigars, laughter spilling from gold-trimmed walls. But to Corinna Ashwell, it was nothing more than theater. She moved silently among them, refilling glasses, arranging trays, and clearing empty plates, the invisible shadow that ensured everyone else's comfort. Her mother's approving nods came not from pride, but from the efficiency with which she performed her unacknowledged duties. At one point, Eleanor's sharp eyes darted toward her. "Corinna, the fire is dying. Do see to it before our guests catch a chill." "Yes, mother." No acknowledgement. No thanks. Just the expectation that Corinna would obey. As she crouched by the grand fireplace, adding a log to the glowing embers, she caught a reflection in the glass, the sharp profile of Damien Holt. He wasn't watching the fire. He was watching her. Their eyes met in the flicker of flame. Something unspoken passed between them. Not recognition of her power. He couldn't possibly know, but an acknowledgement of presence. It was as though, in a room full of hollow voices, he had found someone different. Someone real. Corinna quickly turned away, masking her expression as she adjusted the log. Later, when most of the guests had grown comfortable with brandy and conversation, Damien drifted away from the cluster of businessmen around Charles Ashwell and found his way toward the gallery at the side of the mansion. Corinna was there, quietly arranging a stack of unused linens. "You're not much for the spotlight, are you?" His voice was calm, curious. Corinna glanced up, startled but composed. "Someone has to make sure the evening doesn't fall apart." He tilted his head, studying her. "Interesting. Most people in this house are desperate to be noticed." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "And what about you?" Damien's gaze lingered on her. "I notice more when I stand back." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. For the first time that evening, Corinna felt the sharp edge of her carefully guarded solitude soften. Here was someone whose eyes did not skim past her as if she were a shadow. Here was someone who, unknowingly, was already tied to her fate. But she couldn't allow the connection to grow.
Not yet.
Not while her empire thrived in silence, shielded from the very people under this roof. "Your father seems eager to impress you," Damien said after a pause, glancing toward the dining hall. Corinna's laugh was soft, almost bitter. "My father doesn't care whether I'm here or not. I'm only valuable when I'm silent." He frowned, as if the answer unsettled him. "Then he doesn't know what he has." Her heart tightened. If only he knew. By midnight, the guests began to leave, their voices loud with drink and promises of future gatherings. Charles shook hands with Damien Holt, boasting about ventures he had no hand in, while Eleanor bid farewells with the elegance of a queen. Juliana fluttered her lashes at Holt as if she were auditioning for attention, while Adrian stumbled slightly, laughing at his own jokes. And Corinna? She stood at the edge, unseen as ever. But when Damien's eyes swept the room for the last time, they found hers again. His look was brief, almost imperceptible, but it sent a current through her chest. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving behind only the faintest trace of intrigue. When the last car rolled down the driveway and silence fell over the estate, Corinna moved quickly. She excused herself from her mother's orders to tidy the mess and retreated to her own wing of the house. Behind the heavy oak door of her private study, she locked the world out. The room was her sanctuary. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a mahogany desk polished to a dark sheen, and, most importantly, a wall safe hidden behind a painting of a winter landscape. She slipped the painting aside, pressed her thumb against the concealed scanner, and opened the safe. Inside were folders, flash drives, and documents that no one in her family knew existed. Company records, international contracts, bank statements, evidence of a fortune meticulously built in silence. Corinna drew out her laptop and began to work. The night's charade was behind her. Now, she was herself. She logged into secure accounts, checked balances, reviewed pending acquisitions, and approved transfers. Numbers flashed across the screen, each one a silent testament to her independence. The holding company linked to Damien Holt's latest partnership was performing better than projected. Profits had surged. Their combined venture was solid. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Her family might treat her like a ghost, but the world beyond these walls was already bending to her influence. And one day soon, that world would collide with the Ashwell's illusions. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She quickly closed the laptop, returning the files to the safe before answering. Juliana stood there, her silk robe trailing behind her, an expression of suspicion thinly veiled as curiosity. "What are you doing in here so late?" she asked, eyes darting past Corinna into the dimly lit study. "Reading," Corinna replied smoothly. Juliana arched a brow. "Reading? At midnight? You're so strange, Corinna." She smirked, leaning against the doorframe. You could at least try to be interesting. No wonder no one notices you." Corinna's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Good night, Juliana." Her sister laughed softly and drifted away, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and mockery. Corinna shut the door, locking it again, her heart steady. Juliana suspected nothing, but curiosity could be dangerous. She made a mental note to be more careful. The following morning, the house buzzed with Eleanor's sharp commands as servants cleared away the remnants of the gathering. Charles barked instructions into his phone about meetings. Juliana complained about being tired. Adrian demanded breakfast in bed. And Corinna? She sat at the table, sipping tea quietly, her mind far from their voices. Her phone vibrated. A secure message flashed across the screen, coded in a way only she could decipher. "We need to talk. Urgent. DH." Her breath caught. Damien Holt. Had he discovered something? Did he know? Or was this about business? Their business, hidden behind layers of secrecy? Either way, the timing was dangerous. She couldn't risk exposure. But curiosity was a force she couldn't ignore. Corinna excused herself from the table and slipped into the solitude of her study, her pulse quickening as she prepared to respond. The world outside her family's blind arrogance was closing in, and the balance she had maintained so carefully was beginning to tremble. For the first time in years, Corinna Ashwell felt the faintest hint of fear. Not for what she might lose, but for what might finally be revealed. Corinna sat frozen in her study, the glow of her phone illuminating the words that made her heart pound faster than it had in years. "We need to talk. Urgent. DH. Damien Holt." She stared at the message, weighing the possibilities. The most dangerous thing about her double life wasn't the empire itself, it was proximity. Every layer of secrecy she had built, every shell company, every hidden partnership, was designed to protect her identity. But Damien's presence at the Ashwell estate blurred the boundaries. He was both her silent ally in business and a stranger standing at her father's side. And now he wanted to talk. Urgently. Her instinct screamed caution. But something deeper, curiosity, perhaps even longing, urged her forward. She typed carefully. When and where? The reply came within seconds. "This afternoon. Park near the riverside. No one else." Corinna exhaled slowly. A risk, yes, but one she couldn't ignore. The Ashwell household carried on as usual that morning, completely unaware of the storm brewing under their roof. Eleanor Ashwell held court in the drawing room, instructing servants with the precision of a general. Charles disappeared into his office, no doubt scheming over ventures he would later take credit for. Juliana lounged in silk pajamas, scrolling through photographs of herself from the night before, while Adrian complained about a hangover. To them, Corinna was invisible as always. She slipped out unnoticed, her car gliding down the long driveway while the mansion shrank behind her. The city unfolded before her as she drove. Busy streets, winter air heavy with the scent of pine from vendors selling last-minute wreaths, the buzz of shoppers caught in holiday frenzy. But Corinna saw none of it. Her mind raced with scenarios, calculations, and outcomes. By the time she reached the Riverside Park, her pulse had steadied, but the weight in her chest had not lifted. Damien was already there, leaning casually against a black car, the icy wind tugging at his dark coat. He looked perfectly composed, but his eyes, sharp, watchful, gave away something more. "Miss Ashwell," he greeted as she approached, his voice even. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Corinna kept her expression unreadable. "You said it was urgent." A faint smile touched his lips. "Direct." "I like that." They walked along the quiet path, the river moving in a slow, cold current beside them. Corinna kept her hands tucked in her coat pockets, her mind alert. "I'll get to the point," Damien said, his voice low. "Last night I realized something unusual. Your family is eager to impress. Your father, especially. But you," his eyes flicked toward her. "You don't play the same game. You are the only one in that house who seemed real." Corinna's breath caught, but she masked it with a neutral tone. "You came all this way to tell me that?" Damien stopped walking, turning fully to her. "No. I came because I think there's more to you than what your family lets on." Her heart hammered in her chest, though she forced her face to remain calm. What makes you say that? He studied her for a long moment. Instinct. And business has taught me to trust mine. Corinna held his gaze, feeling the thin line between danger and connection sharpen. She wanted to dismiss him, to retreat into the safety of her secrets. Yet something about the way he looked at her, as though she wasn't invisible, as though he saw her, made it difficult to turn away. Instinct can be misleading, she said softly. Not this time, Damien replied. The silence stretched, charged with unspoken truths. Then he shifted slightly, his tone more measured. There's another reason I wanted to meet. The company I partnered with recently, Ashford Holdings. Do you know it? Corinna's stomach tightened. Ashford Holdings was hers, one of her largest and most carefully shielded entities. Yes, she said cautiously. I've heard of it. I did some digging, Damien continued. It's clean, efficient, almost too precise. No wasted resources, no public face. It's unusual. I want to know who's behind it. Corinna forced herself to breathe evenly. Why? Because whoever it is, Damien said, they're brilliant. And I don't like being in business with ghosts. His words sliced through her composure. For years, she had built walls around her identity. Now, standing before this man, she felt those walls tremble. She chose her reply carefully. Maybe some people are stronger in the shadows. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly, as if her words carried more weight than she intended to reveal. They walked in silence for a while, the winter wind biting at their faces. Finally, Damien stopped near the water's edge. Look, he said, his tone shifting to something softer. If I'm wrong, then tell me and I'll drop it. But if I'm right, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know I can trust you. Corinna's throat tightened. Trust. A word she had long abandoned. No one in her family had ever given it, and no one had ever deserved it. Except perhaps this man, who was unknowingly bound to her already. But the risk was too great. You're asking for something I can't give, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Damien studied her, his jaw tightening, but he didn't press further. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though filing the moment away. Then I'll wait, he said simply. Corinna turned to leave, her pulse racing. She had walked into this meeting thinking she could control it, but Damien Holt had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. As she drove back toward the mansion, she replayed every word, every glance, every subtle probe. He was too close. If he pushed further, her entire empire could be exposed. And yet, beneath the fear, another feeling simmered. A dangerous one. She wanted him to see her. Back at the estate, Eleanor was in the middle of scolding a servant for polishing silver incorrectly. Charles barked into his phone about a deal he barely understood. Juliana lounged in the sitting room, painting her nails, while Adrian flipped through channels on the television. No one asked where Corinna had been. No one noticed the tension in her shoulders, the flush on her cheeks, or the tremor in her hands. That night, as she sat alone in her study, Corinna stared at the documents spread before her. Numbers, contracts, figures, they had always been her shield, her power. But now, for the first time, they felt fragile. Because someone was getting close. Damien Holt wasn't just another partner. He was a storm on the horizon, threatening to unravel everything she had built. And yet, deep in the quiet corners of her heart, Corinna Ashwell feared that she didn't want to stop him. The Ashwell mansion glittered again 2 nights later, this time for a smaller, more intimate gathering. Charles Ashwell believed in frequent displays of wealth. He claimed they strengthened alliances, though most saw them as vanity projects. Corinna moved through the house as expected, preparing every detail under Eleanor's sharp eye. But her thoughts were elsewhere. Damien Holt's words echoed in her mind. If I'm right, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know I can trust you. The problem wasn't just his suspicion. It was her reaction. For years, she had cultivated detachment, keeping people at arm's length. Yet in a single conversation, he had cracked the armor she thought was impenetrable. She wasn't just afraid he might uncover her secret. She was afraid of how much she wanted him to. By the time the guests arrived, Corinna had forced her composure back into place. She wore a deep emerald dress, understated but elegant, her dark hair swept into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Unlike Juliana, who glittered in sequins and jewels, Corinna's beauty was quiet, the kind that lingered rather than demanded. Eleanor noticed, of course. "Corinna, must you always look so plain?" she remarked, her tone sharp but casual enough to draw laughter from Juliana and Adrian. "You're a disappointment to the family's image." Corinna absorbed the words with practiced calm, though her hands tightened around the serving tray she carried. Then Damien Holt entered the room. His presence shifted the atmosphere instantly. Conversations hushed for a fraction of a second before resuming with exaggerated energy. He moved with the ease of someone who belonged anywhere, his tailored suit and commanding air drawing attention without effort. Corinna tried to fade into the background, but his eyes found her almost immediately. For a moment, it felt as though the crowded room disappeared, leaving only the two of them suspended in silence. He gave no outward sign of recognition beyond a faint nod, but her pulse quickened all the same. The evening unfolded with the usual performance, Charles boasting of ventures he barely understood, Eleanor playing the gracious hostess, Juliana fluttering around Damien with forced charm, and Adrian exaggerating his non-existent accomplishments. Corinna remained at the edges, observing. Yet every so often, Damien's gaze flicked toward her, brief but deliberate, as though reminding her of the conversation they had shared by the riverside. At one point, Juliana cornered her near the bar. "Don't think I didn't notice," she said, her voice dripping with envy. "The way he looks at you. As if you're interesting." She laughed bitterly. "But we both know that's impossible. You have nothing to offer a man like him." Corinna met her sister's eyes, calm and unflinching. "Perhaps not everything worth offering is visible." Juliana scoffed and stormed away, but her words lingered in the air. If Juliana was noticing Damien's attention, others would too. That made him not only a complication but a risk. Hours later, when most of the guests had left and the mansion was quiet, Corinna retreated to the library for solitude. She needed space to breathe, away from her family's scorn and her own turbulent thoughts. The library was her sanctuary, walls of books, the faint scent of leather and dust, a fireplace casting a soft glow. She sank into a chair, closing her eyes for just a moment. But she wasn't alone. "You disappear too often," Damien's voice came from the shadows. Her eyes flew open. He stood by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of brandy. How long had he been there? "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the rush of heat in her chest. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "And yet here I am. Tell me, Corinna, what are you so afraid of?" Her breath caught. No one ever asked her that. No one ever cared enough to notice the cracks beneath her surface. "I'm not afraid," she replied, though her voice betrayed the faintest tremor. Damien's eyes softened. "You should be. Secrets have a way of unraveling when least expected." The words struck too close. Did he know? Could he possibly have pieced it together already? Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Juliana's voice carried closer, sharp with suspicion. "Corinna? Are you hiding in here again?" Panic flared. If Juliana found them together, questions would follow. Dangerous questions. Corinna moved quickly, pressing a hand against Damien's arm, urging him toward the side door that led to the terrace.
"Go. Now."
For a heartbeat, he resisted, his eyes locking onto hers as if unwilling to break the moment. Then, with a faint nod, he slipped into the night, vanishing just as Juliana entered. "There you are," Juliana said, her eyes narrowing. "Why is the terrace door open?" Corinna forced a calm smile. "I needed air." Juliana studied her for a long moment, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "You're hiding something," she whispered finally, almost to herself. Then, louder. "Mother's looking for you." She turned and swept out, leaving Corinna alone once more. But the damage was done. Later that night, long after the house had fallen silent, Corinna sat in her study, staring at the flickering cursor on her laptop screen. Damien was becoming too entangled in her life, not only through business but through presence. And Juliana's growing suspicion was a danger she couldn't ignore. She should cut ties, distance herself, protect the empire she had built. And yet, when her phone buzzed with a new message, her resolve wavered. "I won't stop until I know the truth."
DH.
Corinna's hand trembled as she set the phone down. Her carefully constructed world, balanced so perfectly for 15 years, was beginning to crack. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, a part of her wanted it to break. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Ashwell mansion, softening the hard edges of marble and glass. Yet to Corinna Ashwell, the brightness felt intrusive, as though the day itself was determined to expose what she had worked so carefully to conceal. She sat at her small desk in the corner of her room, laptop open, eyes scanning a financial report that made her stomach knot. A competitor had undercut one of her hidden ventures, a technology subsidiary she owned discreetly through multiple shell companies. The loss wasn't crippling, but it was noticeable, and in the game she played, even the smallest crack could grow into a fault line. The problem wasn't the loss itself. It was the timing. Just as Damien Holt had begun circling her, just as Juliana's suspicion had sharpened, the empire she had built in silence was showing signs of vulnerability. A knock at the door broke her concentration. "Breakfast," came Eleanor's cool voice. Not a request, but a command. Corinna closed the laptop, locking it with a practiced keystroke before rising. She smoothed her dress, schooling her features into calm before stepping into the hall. The dining room, as always, was a theater of performance. Charles sat at the head of the table, scanning the financial section of the morning paper with a pretense of importance. Eleanor fussed over Adrian's career prospects, while Juliana leaned lazily in her chair, scrolling through her phone. "Corinna," Eleanor said the moment she entered, "try not to be late. It reflects poorly on the family when you can't even manage punctuality." "Yes, mother," Corinna murmured, slipping into her seat. Juliana glanced up with a sly smile. "You missed quite the excitement last night after you disappeared." Damien Holt stayed longer than expected. He asked a lot of questions. Her eyes glinted with malice. "Mostly about you." Corinna's fork stilled midway to her plate. "Me?" Juliana's smile widened. "Don't look so surprised. He's curious. Though I can't imagine why. Perhaps he's drawn to charity cases." Charles snorted. "Mr. Holt is a businessman. If he has questions, they're about deals, not daughters. Don't read into things, Juliana." But Juliana didn't relent. She leaned closer across the table, her tone dropping to something sharper. "I think he sees something in you, Corinna. Something you don't want anyone else to see." Corinna forced a calm expression, but inside her chest tightened. Juliana was reckless, but her instincts were sharper than most gave her credit for. If she kept digging, she might stumble onto truths no one was meant to know. Later that day, Corinna slipped away from the mansion under the guise of running errands. In reality, she headed to one of her hidden offices, a sleek space in the city, rented under a false name, staffed by employees who never knew their true benefactor. She moved through the office with quiet confidence, reviewing numbers, giving instructions, and smoothing over the losses from the recent setback. Yet the unease never left her. Every conversation, every spreadsheet seemed to whisper the same truth. The walls were closing in. And then, as she stepped into her private office, she froze. Damien Holt was sitting in her chair, his posture relaxed, but his eyes razor-sharp. "How?" she began, her voice a whisper of shock. He held up a hand, his expression unreadable. "Relax. I didn't break in. I was invited." He gestured toward her assistant outside the glass door. "You might want to review who you trust." Her pulse hammered in her ears. "You shouldn't be here." "On the contrary," he said smoothly, rising to his feet. "I think this is exactly where I should be. You've been running a very impressive operation, Miss Ashwell. Or should I say, Ms. Whitaker? That's one of the names you use, isn't it?" Her stomach dropped. He knew. Not everything, not yet, but enough to be dangerous. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into," she said, her voice low but steady. Then help me understand. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because from where I stand, you've built something extraordinary. And you've hidden it from everyone, including your own family.
Why?
Corinna held his gaze, torn between fear and an inexplicable pull toward him. She should deny, deflect, and protect her empire at all costs. But part of her longed, desperately, to tell someone the truth, to unburden herself. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed sharply on the desk. A message flashed across the screen. They're watching you. Be careful. No name. No number. Just the warning. Corinna's blood ran cold. Whoever sent it knew her secret. And worse, they knew she was in danger. That night, back at the mansion, Corinna barely touched her dinner. Eleanor's sharp comments about her lack of appetite went unanswered. Charles rambled about a possible business opportunity with Holt Enterprises, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his roof. Juliana, however, noticed everything. She leaned close to Corinna when the others were distracted, her voice a venomous whisper. You're slipping. I can see it. And I'm going to find out why. Corinna forced herself not to react, but her grip tightened around her wineglass until she feared it might shatter. Upstairs in her room, she paced restlessly, Damien's words and the anonymous warning colliding in her mind. Her empire was no longer invisible. The shadows she had thrived in were thinning. She stood at the window, staring out at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, someone was pulling strings, and she didn't know if Damien Holt was her greatest ally or her most dangerous enemy. But one thing was certain. The life she had fought to build in secret was unraveling. And when the truth came out, it would not only destroy her, it would destroy everyone who thought they knew her. The following morning began deceptively calm. Sunlight slanted across the marble floors of the Ashwell mansion, and birdsong floated through the garden windows. To anyone looking in, it was another day in a privileged household, quiet, pristine, untouched. But Corinna Ashwell's world was anything but untouched. She hadn't slept. The anonymous warning still burned on her phone screen, its words replaying every time she closed her eyes. They're watching you. Be careful. She didn't know who they were. Rivals? Enemies? Someone within her own family? The uncertainty gnawed at her. At breakfast, Eleanor launched into a lecture about charity galas. Charles pretended to read the paper, Adrian mumbled excuses about a failed interview, and Juliana eyed Corinna with the same predator's curiosity as the night before. When the maid poured coffee, Juliana broke the silence. Corinna, you look exhausted. Secrets keeping you awake. Corinna's hand stilled on her cup, but she didn't rise to the bait. Some of us actually work, she said evenly. Juliana's lips curved into a thin smile. Strange. I've never seen you work a day in your life. Charles cleared his throat. Enough, Juliana. Damien Holt has agreed to meet me this afternoon. We'll be discussing potential investment opportunities. I expect everyone in this family to behave with composure.
Corinna's chest tightened.
Damien again. She couldn't decide if his presence was fate or misfortune, only that it was becoming impossible to avoid. Later that afternoon, Corinna retreated to the city under the pretense of errands. But her true destination was a quiet cafe tucked in a corner street, one of her safe spots, a place where she sometimes planned in solitude. She ordered tea and sat near the window, her laptop open but ignored. Her eyes kept drifting to her phone, waiting, almost daring it to light up with another anonymous message. It didn't take long. You're careless. Do you think Holt won't expose you? Meet me tonight.
Dockside Pier.
Midnight.
Come alone.
The blood drained from her face. Whoever this was, they not only knew about her empire, they understood the danger Damien Holt posed. Her instinct screamed trap. Yet if she ignored it, she risked leaving an unknown threat unchecked. She typed back with trembling fingers.
Who are you?
No reply came. Back at the mansion, preparations for Charles's meeting with Damien were underway. Eleanor supervised the staff. Juliana fluttered around in a dress far too extravagant for a business meeting, and Adrian lurked at the edges, envious of the attention Holt's presence commanded. Corinna slipped into the drawing room just as Damien entered. He was composed as always, his presence commanding yet calm, a storm beneath still waters. Charles greeted him with forced warmth. "Mr. Holt, always a pleasure." Damien's gaze flicked briefly to Corinna before returning to Charles. "Likewise." As the discussion turned to financial prospects, Corinna sat silently, observing. Damien outlined a plan for a joint venture, something that would merge Holt Enterprises with a new tech initiative. But Corinna froze when she recognized the company name. It was hers, hidden behind layers of aliases, now laid bare on the table. She kept her face blank, but her heart pounded. How much did he know? Was this a test? A threat? Or something else entirely? At one point, his eyes met hers across the room, holding for just a fraction too long. There was no malice in his gaze, but there was intent, a silent message she couldn't yet decipher. Juliana, of course, noticed. She leaned over to whisper in her ear. "You really should be more careful. The way he looks at you, it's dangerous. And I'm going to find out why." Night fell heavy and cold. Corinna left the mansion under the guise of visiting a friend, her driver instructed to drop her near the city. From there, she walked alone to Dockside Pier, the place mentioned in the anonymous message. The air was damp with salt and smoke, the water below black and restless. The pier was deserted, save for a single figure standing near the edge, half hidden in shadow. Corinna approached cautiously, her heels clicking against the worn wood. "You sent the message." The figure turned, a man, older, with sharp features and eyes that glinted with something between warning and threat. "You've been careless, Miss Ashwell. Or should I say, the woman behind Whitaker Holdings." Her stomach dropped. He knew the name of one of her shell companies. Too much. "Who are you?" she demanded, forcing steel into her voice. "Someone who's been watching. Someone who knows what you've built. And someone who knows others are watching too. Holt isn't your only problem." Her pulse hammered. "Then tell me what you want." He smiled faintly, a predator's smile. "Simple. Protection costs money. Pay me, and your secret stays safe. Refuse, and I won't be the only one whispering your name in dangerous places." Blackmail. The oldest, ugliest game. Corinna's nails dug into her palms, but her face remained calm. "If you think you can threaten me, you're gravely mistaken." The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then prove it. Midnight tomorrow. Same place. Bring 500,000. Or I make a call that will end your empire in a week." He walked away without another word, leaving her standing alone on the pier, her heart racing. By the time Corinna returned to the mansion, it was nearly dawn. She moved through the darkened halls silently, her mind churning. She had faced obstacles before, rivals, markets, even betrayals. But this was different. This was personal. Someone out there knew who she was, and they were willing to burn her empire to ash unless she obeyed. As she shut her bedroom door, her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Don't trust anyone. Not even Holt." Her breath caught in her throat. Whoever this was, they weren't finished with her. And the terrifying part was, she didn't know if they were saving her or setting her up for ruin. The following day unfolded like a carefully staged play, but Corinna Ashwell was no longer an actress who knew her lines. Every conversation, every glance felt loaded, as though everyone around her could see the cracks forming beneath her polished exterior. Her mind was consumed by the man at Dockside Pier. His words replayed in an endless loop. 500,000. Or your empire burns. She had the money, that wasn't the issue. The issue was principle. For 15 years, she had built everything through cunning, calculation, and secrecy. To bow to a blackmailer would not only wound her pride, but invite further attacks. And yet, the risk of refusal felt dangerously high. At breakfast, she barely touched her food. Juliana noticed, of course. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with suspicion. "You've been sneaking out a lot lately, sister. Late nights, tired mornings, you're not having some scandalous affair, are you?" Eleanor's fork clinked against her plate. "Juliana, don't be vulgar." But Juliana only smiled sweetly. I'm simply curious. Corinna never tells us anything. Perhaps Mr. Holt has captured her attention. Corinna's heart jolted, but she kept her face perfectly calm. You mistake silence for secrecy, Juliana. Not everything I do revolves around men. The table fell quiet, but Juliana's smirk told Corinna the battle was far from over. That afternoon, Damien Holt requested a private audience with Charles Ashwell. Corinna was expected to attend as well, a silent observer as always. She entered the study to find Damien already waiting, his tall frame relaxed yet alert, his expression one of quiet calculation. Mr. Holt, Charles greeted warmly, I trust you've had time to review my proposal. I have, Damien replied smoothly. And while there's potential, I believe there's a missing element. A partner with vision. Someone who knows how to turn potential into power. His eyes flicked deliberately to Corinna. Her breath caught. It wasn't subtle, not at all. Charles, oblivious, launched into another speech about his supposed business acumen. But Damien's gaze remained steady, a silent acknowledgement of what he already knew. Corinna was that missing element. After the meeting, as Charles excused himself to take a call, Damien moved closer. His voice was low, meant only for her. You've built something remarkable, but you're vulnerable. Whoever approached you last night, they won't stop. Corinna stiffened. You followed me? He didn't deny it. I protect my interests. Her pulse raced. You have no right. I have every right, he cut in sharply, though his tone softened almost immediately. Corinna, I'm not your enemy. But if you shut me out, others will take advantage of that silence. And they won't be as forgiving. Forgiving. The word lingered between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. She wanted to push him away, to deny everything, to protect her secret with the same iron will that had carried her for years. But there was something in his eyes, not just curiosity, but a strange, unsettling respect. And for the first time, she wondered if letting someone in might not be a weakness. That evening, she returned to her hidden office downtown, determined to review her empire's defenses. She doubled encryption, reassigned funds, and rerouted transactions. Yet no matter how many precautions she took, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At precisely midnight, her phone buzzed with another message. Time's up. Dockside Pier. Bring the money. Alone. Her hands tightened around the phone. She hadn't decided whether to pay, but the message chose for her. Refusing would risk exposure. She locked the office, slipped into the night, and made her way to the pier. The same man waited, his smile sharper than before. You're punctual. That's good. I came to tell you I won't be paying, Corinna said flatly. His expression darkened.
Brave.
Or foolish. Do you know how quickly I can destroy you? I built my empire from nothing, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. If you think I'll hand it over because of threats, you underestimate me. He chuckled, stepping closer, his breath sharp with tobacco. Then consider this a demonstration. He pulled a small folder from his coat and handed it to her. Inside were photographs. Grainy, but unmistakable. Images of Corinna entering one of her hidden offices, signing under an alias, speaking with employees who believed they worked for someone else.
Proof.
Her chest constricted. If these reached the wrong hands, her carefully woven facade would unravel overnight. The man leaned in. Next time, Miss Ashwell, it won't just be pictures. Next time, it'll be your name splashed across every headline. 500,000. You have 48 hours. He turned and vanished into the fog before she could respond, leaving her clutching the damning folder. Back at the mansion, Corinna locked herself in her room, her mind spinning. The blackmailer wasn't bluffing. He had access, knowledge, and evidence. And worse, she had no idea how deep his network went. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from the blackmailer. You shouldn't have gone alone.
DH.
Corinna stared at the screen, her heart racing. Damien knew. He had followed her. Again. And now she couldn't tell whether his presence was salvation, or the final push toward her undoing. The night had settled heavily over the city, its silence broken only by the occasional rumble of distant traffic. Corinna Ashwell sat at the edge of her bed, her mind churning with fragments of conversations and half-formed suspicions. The walls of her apartment, once a refuge, now felt like they were closing in on her, echoing secrets she had yet to uncover. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Elias. "Meet me tomorrow at noon. There are things you need to see for yourself." The words pulled at her in conflicting ways. She wanted clarity, yet every time Elias revealed a piece of the puzzle, it only deepened the shadows. Corinna pressed the phone against her chest, her heartbeat thundering with both anticipation and dread. She lay back on the bed, eyes open to the ceiling, replaying the last few weeks in her head. The late-night whispers she had overheard, the documents that had gone missing from the archives, the subtle ways certain people recoiled when her father's name was spoken. None of it added up. And yet, some instinct told her Elias was walking a dangerous line between protector and manipulator. The following morning brought no relief. The city looked deceptively ordinary, coffee shops humming, children laughing on their way to school, but Corinna moved through it with heightened awareness, as if every passerby might be carrying a secret. She met Elias in a small, nondescript cafe tucked between two bookstores. He was already there, his eyes scanning the room even as he pretended to sip coffee. When he saw her, his expression softened, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. "You came," he said quietly as she sat across from him. "I need answers, Elias. No more riddles. No more half-truths." He slid a thin folder across the table. Corinna hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling. Inside were photographs, letters, and financial records, each one a thread that, when woven together, revealed a tapestry of betrayal. Her father's name was stamped on transaction after transaction, his signature at the bottom of agreements that spoke of corruption, manipulation, and a network of people who had been silenced for standing in his way. Her breath caught. This can't be real." "It's real," Elias said, his voice steady, but filled with something like regret. "Your father's legacy isn't what you think it is. And the people protecting that legacy, they won't stop until you're silenced too." The cafe's background noise seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of her pulse pounding in her ears. Tears burned at the edges of her vision, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to break here, not now. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her voice little more than a whisper. Elias leaned forward, his gaze locking with hers. "Because I owe you more than you realize. And because I can't stand by and watch them destroy you the way they destroyed others." For a moment, the space between them crackled with something unspoken, fear, anger, and an undercurrent of longing neither dared to acknowledge. Before Corinna could respond, Elias's phone vibrated sharply against the table. He glanced at the screen, and his face drained of color. "They know we're here," he murmured. In an instant, the cafe no longer felt safe. The warmth of the morning sun streaming through the window turned into a spotlight. Every stranger became a potential threat. "Come with me," Elias said urgently, standing. He held out his hand. Corinna hesitated for only a fraction of a second before taking it. Together, they moved quickly out the back door into the alley, the folder pressed tightly against her chest. Her life had just changed in a way she could never undo, and somewhere deep inside, she knew the real storm was only beginning. The alley behind the cafe smelled of damp brick and old rainwater, its shadows stretching long and menacing. Corinna Ashwell clutched the folder tightly against her chest as Elias pulled her forward, weaving through the narrow passage with urgency. Every sound, the scrape of a shoe on pavement, the creak of a rusted fire escape, felt amplified, like warning bells in the dark. When they finally emerged onto a quieter street, Elias didn't slow down. His grip on her wrist was firm but not harsh, his strides purposeful. "We don't have much time," he muttered. "They're closing in." Corinna's pulse hammered against her ribs. "Who exactly are they?" she demanded, struggling to match his pace. "The ones who've kept your father's secrets buried all these years." The ones who gain the most by ensuring the truth never sees daylight. His voice was low but charged with anger. You saw the records. This isn't just about money. It's about power, influence, lives ruined, so someone else could rise. They ducked into a deserted parking garage. Elias stopped suddenly, turning to face her. His eyes searched hers, torn between calculation and concern. Corinna, from this point forward, you can't trust anyone. Not your colleagues, not your so-called friends. They'll use every weakness against you. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to cling to the idea that someone out there was safe, but deep down, she knew he was right. The documents in her hands carried too much weight. They were both a weapon and a target. What do you expect me to do with this? She whispered, lifting the folder. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice. You need to decide if you're ready to burn the world your father built, or let it swallow you whole. His words struck like a match against dry kindling, igniting both fear and defiance within her. She thought of the nights her father's shadow had loomed larger than his presence, the unanswered questions that had haunted her since childhood, and the growing ache of betrayal that no evidence could soften. But she also thought of the warmth in Elias's eyes when he had chosen to stand beside her, despite the risks. There was something between them, fragile, unspoken, but undeniable, threaded through the chaos like a lifeline. The sound of tires screeching echoed through the garage, snapping the moment in half. Headlights flared at the far end, blinding in the darkness. Elias cursed under his breath. They've found us. He grabbed her hand again, urgency flooding his every move. Together they darted deeper into the maze of concrete pillars, shadows chasing them with every step.
The folder pressed against
her ribs was no longer just paper. It was the key to unraveling everything, but also the reason death now lurked so close behind. As they slipped through a side exit and into the night air, Corinna realized there was no turning back. The truth demanded to be unearthed, but the price of revealing it could be more than she had ever imagined. The game had shifted, and this time, survival would mean walking a razor's edge between trust and betrayal, between love and destruction. Cold night air whipped against Corinna Ashwell's face as she and Elias sprinted across the dimly lit street. Behind them, the roar of an engine and the sharp slam of a car door echoed like gunfire. Corinna's lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed her legs forward. Elias led her through a narrow side street, his grip firm as though letting go meant certain death. "Where are we going?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "Someplace they won't expect," Elias said without looking back. His tone carried the weight of someone used to running, hiding, and surviving. They slipped into an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the district. The heavy metal door groaned shut behind them, and Elias quickly secured it with a rusted chain. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the ragged rhythm of their breathing. Corinna leaned against a wall, clutching the folder to her chest like armor. "This can't go on forever," she whispered. "We can't keep running." Elias moved closer, his eyes dark in the faint glow filtering through broken windows. "You're right. At some point, we have to strike back. But we can't do that blindly. First, you need to understand the full scope of what we're facing."